You can't open a newspaper today without seeing above the fold some article on immigration. Most of those debates are about legalization and temporary workers and border, and buried deeper in some of the articles are discussions of access to courts and fairness of proceedings, and that's what we'd like to focus on today. Part of any demand for better border enforcement, it seems to be always accompanied by a request for stripped-down procedures for determining the ability of someone to come or stay in the United States, and then also for removing jurisdiction from the courts.
You know, a lot of court stripping seems very technical. It seems very difficult to get your hands around, but I think one thing that's critical to keep in mind is that there are real people's lives at stake, and that judicial review plays a critical role in ensuring that people are not erroneously deported, people are not erroneously detained. We're dealing with liberty, and that's critical, right? We're dealing with someone who's either in detention or is going to be removed from the country. Perhaps they've lived here for decades, perhaps their spouses are U.S. citizens, their kids have grown up here, and so what's at stake is enormously important. But one thing that's always remained a constant throughout the history of our country is that the procedures have largely been fair, in the sense that you could always get into court. And I think for immigrants in particular, coming from other countries where the rule of law is not in place and there's not an independent judiciary to oversee things, I think that is critical. I think that's one of the things that's allowed immigrants to accept their fate, which is unbelievably harsh when you examine it in individual cases and see what's at stake for the families, for the children, but that it makes it at least palatable for them to know that they've received a fair shot in court. And if we take that away, I think that the hardship becomes that much greater.
The ACLU and the immigrants' rights, the human rights organizations, constantly emphasize the idea that we're protecting individuals, we're protecting individual liberty, and that the federal appellate court system is something that's sort of uniquely and especially equipped to deal with these. And I would really dispute both of these. And, you know, the idea of having generalist judges bring competing parties together and arriving at the truth, I just don't see that, because we're dealing with factual and evidentiary issues which are and standards which are completely different from any other area of civil or even criminal law in this country.
It is important to put a human face to these policies, these laws that we have passed, because this is what happens. You know, I don't really know what public policy is served by incarcerating a 59-year-old grandmother who's certainly no threat and has every reason to appear in court. But no one, because there's no judicial review of mandatory detention here, that, you know, that it wasn't even discussed whether it was a good idea to incarcerate her.
People are concerned. They say, you know, if an individual doesn't receive this really criminal procedure level of due process and procedural protections, their liberty or their lives are at stake. I think this is kind of a straw man, because except for a very few limited cases, let's say the Marielito Cubans, or a rather small population of individuals whose countries won't take them back, almost anyone can walk out of a detention center within days or months or something, and by simply agreeing to be removed to their home country.
So not everybody that's in detention is actually someone who has conceded removability. Well, first, the number one category of people who have come here are asylum seekers, people, some of whom have legitimate visas, but at the airport explain that they're here to seek asylum. Our laws right now require the government to detain those people immediately.
Court stripping in the immigration procedure is probably not the ideal way to deal with deal with immigration policy. But it's it's a cheap way for Congress to deal with the problem. It's an easy way for them to brush it under the rug.
And it seems to me at a time of these kinds of dramatic assertions of executive power combined with the ease with which Congress can designate immigrants as criminals, troublemakers, and folks that should be removed from the country. It's the very last moment in our history that we should be removing courts from the kind of review of important issues that have a significant impact on people's lives. It seems to me it's a remarkably inopportune time to be entertaining these kinds of court stripping proposals.